Welcome back, dear children. Today we shall look at a Beehive textbook for Standard 9. In this video, I am going to discuss the poetic devices used by the poet Subramanya Bharati in the poem Wind. Before we look at the poetic devices, let's try to summarize the poem. The wind is a symbol of difficulties or obstacles that humans have to face for their survival. When the poem begins, we find the poet imploring the wind to blow gently, but it does not agree to do so. The wind blows violently, causing a lot of destruction and devastation. In the next few lines, the poet personifies the wind as God, who separates the strong people from the weak. The fast-blowing wind destroys the weak structures like the weak houses, weak doors, weak trees, and even people who are physically and mentally weak. It means that everything and anything that is weak and fragile crumbles down in the face of a strong wind. Hence, the poet advises us to build strong houses fixed with strong doors, so the wind can't penetrate through it and destroy it. We must be healthy physically and mentally to face the hardships that life throws at us. The poet even suggests that we befriend the wind and work in coordination with it. Like the wind, we too should use our intellect and use it to our advantage. The wind is always on the lookout to exploit our weakness. The overview of the poem is that the weak-willed can always be overpowered by the strong. It's only the strong who can stand and face all hurdles with strength and conviction. The poem Wind has a message for one and all. It teaches us many valuable lessons. First of all, never give up when you face any obstacle or difficulty in life. We should look at the brighter side of obstacles and hardships in life and change our problems into weapons. Yes, dear children, we need to be optimistic. There's hardly anyone who doesn't have a problem. It's up to us how we approach these problems and use them to our advantage. Challenges, though look scary, actually help us grow in our lives and is our well-wisher just like our friend. These challenges may frighten us at times, but then they also help us to rediscover ourselves, rediscover our inherent potentialities, so we can look upon them as a friend and not as a foe. Let us change these adversities into opportunities and utilize them as a stepping stone to success. Now let's look at the poem. The poem Wind is written in 22 lines. A quick glance will help you to understand that it is not divided into stanzas. And if you observe it carefully, you'll realize that the lines are unequal. Some are short and some are long. And even you find there is absence of rhyming words. Now, such poems where the lines don't rhyme with each other are known as free verse. We can conclude that the poem Wind is an example of modern poetry which doesn't follow the traditional conventions of stanzas and rhyme scheme. Now let's look at the poetic devices and the figures of speech employed by the poet to enhance the beauty of it. We shall start with the familiar and go on to learn some new figures of speech in this lesson. The first figure of speech is alliteration, which is a repetition of consonant sound. In the poem, we find the wind god winnows and crushes them all. In this line, the word sound represented in the words wind, winnows is repeated for poetic effect. He won't do what you tell him. In this line again, we find the repetition of the word sound through the words won't and what. The next figure of speech is repetition, where words are repeated for poetic effect. Let's see the example. In this poem, we find the following lines. Frail crumbling houses, crumbling doors, crumbling rafters, crumbling wood, crumbling bodies, crumbling lives, crumbling hearts. Now in these lines, the word crumbling has been repeated umpteen number of times to emphasize the destructive power of the wind. The next figure of speech is metaphor, wherein an indirect comparison is made. In this poem, we find the wind god winnows. Here a comparison is made between wheat and people. Just as we winnow the wheat to separate the grains from the chaff, the wind god winnows to separate the strong people from the weak ones. The poem Wind is also an extended example of metaphor, where it represents the challenges and hardships of life. Now we are going to learn a new figure of speech, that's anaphora. Now what is anaphora? It is a word or a group of words which is used repeatedly in the beginning of successive lines to create a special effect or to create emphasis. Here what we have to remember is that a word or a group of words is repeated at the beginning of consecutive lines. First, I'll give you some examples from our day-to-day life. My life has a purpose. My life is my goal. My life is an inspiration. Now, in these three sentences, we find the repetition of words my life at the beginning of each line. The second example, the players were much excited for the tour. The players wished to do a lot of shopping. The players planned to go sightseeing. In these three sentences, again we find the repetition of the words the players at the start of each line. Next, here we have a classic example of anaphora that appears in the speech of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. His famous speech, I Have a Dream. Here you find the repetition of the anaphoral phrase 8 times. The phrase I have a dream is repeated at the start of 8 lines in the speech. Now let's try to find the examples of anaphora in the poem. You tore the pages of the books. You brought rain again. You are very clever at poking fun at weaklings. In these 3 lines, the word you is repeated at the start of each line. The second example, don't break the shutters of the windows. Don't scatter the papers. Don't throw down the books on the shelf. In these 3 continuous lines, we find the repetition of the word don't at the beginning of each line. So anaphora is that figure of speech where a word or a group of words is repeated at the start of each line in consecutive sentences. The next new figure of speech that you're going to learn in this poem is personification, wherein an inanimate object or an abstract idea is given a human quality. Look at these examples. The leaves waved in the wind. The wind howled in the night. Lightning danced across the sky. In these examples, the inanimate objects like the leaves, the wind, and the lightning have been given the human quality of waving, howling, dancing, respectively. Let's try to find examples in the poem. You tore the pages of the book. You brought rain again. In this poem, the poet refers to the wind as you, as if it is a human. Throughout the poem, you find the poet addressing the wind as you. The wind god winnows. Here, wind is personified as God. His friendship is good. In this line, wind is personified as a friend. So personification is that figure of speech where a non-living thing or an abstract idea is given a human quality. It is treated as if it is a human. I hope you have been able to follow the poetic devices used in the poem. Thank you one and all for watching this video.